Hello, and welcome to I'm Sick Not Crazy, the podcast that helps you to take control of your own health and healing. My name is Jennifer James, and I'm a licensed and practicing psychotherapist here to talk about becoming your healthiest self, both physically and psychologically. Hello, and welcome back to I'm Sick Not Crazy with Jennifer James, marriage family therapist. Today, I would like to talk about the 6 stages of grief and give you some ideas of how to move through them. So, this came to me this week because I've been thinking about recent events in the United States and the world, and they've really been wearing heavily on my heart. I know that I'm not alone in this. A pandemic where the death toll in the country has exceeded 100,000 people, combined with horrific civil rights violations, followed by demonstrations, protests, rioting, and looting, made for an overwhelming week last week. While I knew that the anxiety of the past few months had increased, I also knew that there was another emotion that I was feeling last week that was waiting for me to recognize it. So I sat myself down and just kind of felt into what was going on with the ache in my chest. And I asked myself, what am I feeling? And slowly it came to me that it was grief. Grief for many things. Grief for the 2020 that I thought I was going to have, and I don't. Grief for months without seeing my friends and family because of the pandemic. Grief for the deprivation of almost zero physical touch since the shutdown in March. Grief for a country divided along multiple ideological lines. Grief for George Floyd, a black man that I never met, who was brutally killed by police. The video of his murder breaks my heart. Grief for police brutality toward peaceful protesters. Grief for only being able to see people's faces on computer screens because they're all covered by masks when we're all in public. I really miss seeing people's smiles. There's so much more to grieve over. While talking with clients this past week, I helped several people identify the grief that is weighing them down. And I think that naming the grief is the first step and helpful in itself. But there's more work to do to process the grief than just to recognize and name it. So I wanted to bring up the 5 stages of grief that were identified in 1969 by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She identified them in her work with the dying, and she recognized these stages as the people that she was working with were coming to terms with the fact that they were going to die. So the stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And they can happen in any order. Each one can happen more than once during the grieving process. And different people take different amounts of time to grieve. There's no right way. And there's no appropriate length of time for grieving. Unfortunately, when people in the United States lose a loved one, they get 5 days off of work, and then they're expected to go back to work and act pretty much like nothing happened. They receive condolences one time from friends and family, and then, strangely, it's never mentioned again, and people think it's over. Months later, when people say that they are still grieving, they tend to get mixed responses. Sometimes people who have had difficult losses in their lives will sympathize with how lonely and difficult it is to grieve a loss in this culture. However, many grievers hear things like, "Oh, it's been months. Aren't you over that yet?" The message that they're grieving wrong shuts people down, shuts people up, and leaves them even more alone in their grief. And grieving is not something to be done alone. Grief is something to be witnessed by others. If you identify with the existential grief that I'm talking about, or if you're grieving the loss of a loved one, whether by death or by leaving, please find people who can bear the weight of your grief enough to witness it. If that's not a loved one, please find a grief support group or a therapist who can be with you while you process your emotions. Grief is not logical. It can't be reasoned with, and you can't think your way out of it, no matter how hard you try. No matter how many times you tell yourself, I should be through this now, it's not going to make any difference. It just takes as long as it takes. And grief lives in the body and must be physically worked through. Ways to move grief out of your body include yoga, body work, journaling, and letting go rituals. Ritual is a beautiful and powerful way to move grief out of the body, and here are a few of my favorite letting go rituals that you can try at your leisure. The first one is to write a letter to the person, the situation that you're grieving, and your intention is to never send it. Put all of your emotion into this letter. Don't be shy. Swearing is totally okay. You can say whatever you want. Nobody is going to read it anyway. Once you feel complete with what you've written, burn, bury, or shred the letter in order to release the emotions. The second one is to take a bath in Epsom salts. Imagine the warm water and the salt drawing all of the grief and pain out of your body. When you feel complete, you feel like it's all been drawn out of you, pull the plug from the tub and watch the grief go down the drain. Third idea is to hold a coconut in your hands. Direct all the grief, pain, anger, sadness, whatever it is that you're feeling, into the coconut. When you feel complete, go outside and smash the coconut against a wall. This is incredibly satisfying, by the way. Be sure to throw the coconut away afterwards. Don't eat it and re-ingest all of that grief. Another idea is to put some music on that speaks to your grief and then give your body permission to move any way that it likes. Don't be shy. Your body will know what it needs. Keep moving until you feel complete. Repeat as needed. It often takes more than one time to release all of the grief, and that's totally okay. Recently, I read the book Finding Meaning, The Sixth Stage of Grief by David Kessler, who worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who we mentioned above, who came up with the 5 stages of grief. So Kessler believes that there is one more stage in the process of grieving that wasn't previously identified, and that is making meaning from the experience. That doesn't mean that you go around saying platitudes like everything happens for a reason, which I hate, by the way. It means that while it still hurts, it may never be okay, and you find a way to make the loss mean something. For instance, David Kessler made his son's death mean something by writing his book and by teaching others about grief. I'm making meaning from the illness that I went through by writing a book about it called I'm Sick Not Crazy. Many other people make meaning by volunteering or by donating to charities. Whatever you find is the right way for you to make meaning for your loss, that is the right way for you, and it's completely perfect. But do look for that meaning because it's an important part of the grieving process. Please be patient with yourself and with those around you who may be grieving differently than you are. If you're in the denial phase and your loved one or friend, family member is in the anger phase, you may have some difficulty relating to each other. That's okay. Be kind to each other about it. There's no right way or wrong way to grieve. And pressuring either yourself or others to grieve differently, to try to fit into some ideal mold, is a great way to do nothing but prolong the process. For those of you that feel as weighed down as I do by the grief of this moment in time, I am witnessing you. You can find information on the book, The Sixth Stage of Grief, that I mentioned above, if you go to grief.com. And I hope that this was helpful and enjoyable for you. If you enjoyed this, I hope that you will subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Spotify, Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye. Thank you for listening to this week's I'm Sick Not Crazy podcast with myself, Jennifer James, MFT. Please remember that this podcast is educational in nature and that it's not intended to substitute for medical or psychological advice. To learn more about my work, to share podcast topic ideas, or to book me for speaking engagements or interviews, please visit my website at jenniferjames-author.com and choose the contact link. If you would like to support my work financially, you can find me at patreon.com/jenniferjamesmft. Thank you, and remember that you can take control of your own health.